in Baltimore. The sleep out of my eyes each and every day. These hockey games are going OT. The Caps are rolling into the night. And meanwhile, the Orioles, I thought that they were going to give me the night off on Wednesday night, Luke. I thought, 9-0 lead early. I got 5 hockey games in progress. I thought, well, I can peek back and forth. And then I peeked back in the third and saw Jimenez, a lengthy third inning with Jimenez, then into the fourth inning, then into the bullpen. And finally in the 7th inning, they scored some more runs. But not an easy effort, and plenty to talk about, from awakening of bats and bad knuckleballs to, well, Ubaldo Jimenez pitched again, right?
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. I mean, I thought Michael Givens calmed that game down very quickly, did a nice job, even if he didn't have his best stuff out on the hill. But, you said it. The Orioles jump out to a 9-0 lead in the first 3 innings. They chase Stephen Wright in the 2nd inning. Home runs galore, swinging the bats well. Even Jonathan Scope and J.J. Hardy got into the act a little bit early on. Scope with the homer, Hardy hits one off the monster. We talked at length the other day about those two struggling early with the bats. And Jimenez, the first couple innings, looked okay. It looked like it was going to be not a great performance from him, but certainly what you needed when you're staked to that kind of a big lead early. And it just completely, kind of defaulted into bad Ubaldo Jimenez, not getting strike one, falling behind, deep counts. Didn't walk a ton of hitters, walked 2 in his 4 1/3 innings, but just no command. The stuff wasn't very good. He only had 1 strikeout. That's where, we've talked about this the last year or two with Jimenez. It's one thing with the shaky command. That's kind of been the story of his career. That's been something that he's had issues with, with walking people. The problem is, as he's now got on the wrong side of 30, this is a guy whose stuff isn't quite what it used to be. His fastball, which used to be a pitch that would sit comfortably 93, 94 just a few years ago, this is a guy who's kind of 89, 90, not missing many bats. So you have someone who can't really command it and not really getting many swings and misses. That's a recipe for what you ended up seeing on Wednesday night, and that was a guy who, despite having that 9-0 lead, couldn't even get through 5 innings and created a longer night for the bullpen than that, frankly, it didn't need, knowing that they're going to be going to Toronto for a 4-game set now. So, just a really disappointing performance from him individually. But, as I said, Michael Givens did an excellent job calming that game down. And, as you pointed out, Orioles push a few runs across the board in the 7th to remove any doubt that, kind of creeps in there when it becomes a 4-run game. And, Boston has the tying run either at the plate or on deck. So it was overall, the final score makes you think relaxing effort, but never any relaxing going on with Ubaldo Jimenez is on the hill, unfortunately.
We've talked about this every time he starts, even after the good starts. It's, well, is he back? There is no consistency. That would be the problem, right? He is a flip-flopper on a 5-day basis as to what you may or may not get. The question is, when does he not have anything anymore? And I think we saw that out of the gate in the beginning. This is, I don't know how many struggles he's had or patches he's had, but far more than any pitcher I can think of in the history of the Orioles when it comes to inconsistency. And I would call it opportunity, and I know they're paying him a lot of money, but they keep throwing him back out there. And I have to think that the old man has, some say in that with a $12 million pitcher that was unloadable in the offseason. And I got to think that the whole organization looks at what happened in Toronto last year. Every time he takes the ball, if I'm Zach Britton, if I'm Adam Jones, I'm thinking like, didn't that dude get us into enough trouble last year and the year before and the year before that? But they keep marching him out there, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be shocked 4 days from now to see him take the ball again, right? I don't. We all have said many times, well, this has got to be the end, right? We said that when they had the fake injury going into the stadium 3 years ago. This has got to be the end. It feels like it's never going to be the end. It feels like he's still their best option 4 days from now.
Well, when you say best option, it's very relative, considering they don't know who their 5th starter is going to be at this point until Chris Tillman comes back.
It's April. They'll figure it out.
But the good news is Tillman is going to pitch in Bowie next week. His extended spring game performance, which was 2 innings, seemed to go pretty well, at least to the point where they're progressing now where he's going to start a minor league rehab assignment. But in the meantime, you look at their options at AAA, and those guys haven't pitched very well. I mean, Mike Wright has been absolutely awful his first 2 starts down there. Jason Aquino had a good spring. He struggled down there. We could see him Saturday. We could see Alec Asher, who they acquired during spring training, and he had a pretty good outing. But these are very, they don't really have any other options that you say, okay, this guy's definitely better than Ubaldo Jimenez. And that's not to say Jimenez is definitely better than those guys, but when you're into that position, when you're already paying the guy, and when you have had him pitch well at times, like he did over the final 6 weeks last year, and I think anyone who watched the Orioles would acknowledge that they probably don't secure a wild card without him pitching the way he did the last 6 weeks. However, they probably wouldn't have been in the position they had been in from a compromise, being compromised with how he pitched over the first 4 months of the season. So, you take the little bit of good with a lot of bad that we tend to see with Jimenez. So, his rotation spot right now isn't in jeopardy, and I think it would be unfair to say it after 2 starts. But you kind of wait to see, all right, when's he going to get into a groove to give you 6 or 7 good starts? And typically he's been able to do that. 2015 he had a solid season. As I said, the last 6 weeks last year he pitched well, but how much of the inconsistency and more than inconsistency, how much of the poor performance are you going to have to endure to get to some of those better performances? So, certainly was not good to see the way he performed on Wednesday. I mean, you got a veteran pitcher, and Buck was diplomatic in how he talked about it after the game, but you could tell in his words that he expected a lot better from a veteran pitcher in that spot. Not as though he needed to shut out the Red Sox, but at least get through 6 innings.
Dude, when they give you a 9-0 lead, you got to at least get a W.
Get through 6. I mean, give your bullpen a little bit of a break, and if you give up 3 or 4 over the course of those 6 innings, fine, because you have that wiggle room. But when you get your pitch count up over 100, and you've retired you've gotten 13 outs, and you've thrown over 100 pitches to do that. I mean, that's we've used the expression below the line. John Harbaugh likes to use that. That's way below the line. That's a case, and you'll hear pitchers talk about this. Palmer alluded to it a couple times. You got to pitch to the scoreboard a little bit when it comes to that, and you got to get it over the plate.
How about strike one?
Yeah, well, and the thing is, if it were as easy as we think it is, just sitting there watching, well, then Ubaldo Jimenez would have way more success because the guy wants to do well. Not a bad guy. He just, he can't repeat his mechanics consistently enough. And the problem now is his stuff has declined over the last couple of years, as you expect for someone who's into his 30s. But it adds up to a really uncomfortable position that he put his team in. And fortunately, Michael Gibbons was able to come in and toss 2 scoreless innings and really calm things down and make what had been a comfortable 9-0 early lead, kind of made things get back in order, and then, of course, the Orioles tack on a few additional runs.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. And, we have never really had a knuckleballer around here. I guess going back to, like, Hoyt Wilhelm. I mean, in all the years that I've covered, I'm trying to think if some guy held on and made a couple of starts here and again, and obviously Messina was famous for the knuckle curve or slurve or whatever you would call it. But the knuckleball thing, all those years watching Wakefield, right? It felt like he pitched for 30 years. All those years with Necro guys and all that stuff. We haven't had a lot of that, but it really is it's a fascinating part of baseball, right? And it's an absolute sort of battle royal anomaly when you have a knuckleball pitcher and he goes out there and within 14 pitches, there's 3 runs up on the board, and you realize he's not really throwing a knuckleball, he's throwing BP.
Yeah, I mean, it is the ultimate all-or-nothing proposition. And that's not to say that a knuckleballer can't have an okay performance, but when you don't have the knuckleball, there's no getting around that. I mean, these are not guys who are equipped to be able to succeed without their primary pitch. I mean, any other quote, normal pitcher who has whatever combination, fastball, slider, change, whatever the repertoire is, there are plenty of pitchers who have good enough stuff that they can survive if their best pitch is failing them on a given night, and that happens. I mean, you'll have plenty of pitchers who just can't command their fastball to save their life, but their secondaries are good enough that they can kind of survive and maybe get through 5 or 6 innings and give their team a chance to win. You're not going to have that with a knuckleballer. If you don't have your knuckler and that thing is spinning, or maybe it's not spinning but it's just staying straight, you're going to get completely crushed. And that's what happened to Stephen Wright, who had an excellent season last year. I mean, everyone who saw him pitch, I mean, you had to be impressed with what he was able to do, and he was just awful. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I mean, there's no...
It was awful pitching all the way around. One was a knuckleballer who wasn't knuckling, and one was, I don't want to call him a knucklehead, but certainly over the last 4 years, of all the things I've seen here in all the years of watching Orioles baseball, the Jimenez thing's one of the damnedest things I've ever seen. They went with Cabrera and some other guys who were unproven, probably a lot longer than they should have.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there are a lot of major league teams right now that would have began their season at league minimum with Ubaldo Jimenez in their rotation. Knowing what we know and knowing that their job's on the line, it's fascinating to me that Buck continues to bet on him. And I think with the knuckleballer, you feel a lot better that maybe 4 days from now he'll go out there and throw a 3-hit shutout and be unhittable if the humidity's right and the temperature's right and his knuckles are right. And I don't know what makes the difference on the knuckleball thing. I mean, feel, grip of the ball, maybe humidity. I mean, I'd have to talk to some knuckleball pitchers about that. There aren't many of them who do that for a living, quite frankly. But it really is a fascinating thing. And Red Sox fans, for the better part of 25 years, they've had a knuckleball pitcher in their rotation. They deal with it every 5th day.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing because they had Wakefield all those years, who, as you said, it felt like he was there 25 years with the Red Sox. And I guess it was, 95 up until, not that terribly long ago.
I'm Googling him. I want to know how many years he did that, because Messina used to always, in the early part of his career, kid around and threaten, literally over a beer, that when it all falls apart for me, I'm going to throw the knuckler. I mean, he would kid around like, hey, because he never knew he was going to make $130 million either. But I think he really did envision himself at, 34, 35. I can add 5 years to my career, and who knows, by then they'll be paying guys like that, $2 million a year. Little did he know they'd be paying him 8 or 10 or 12. But it is... Wakefield could probably still get guys out. So could Necro, because once you can throw it, you can throw it. Wakefield's years in Boston,
I want to say he was there 17, 18 years.
95 to 11. Wow, 95 to 11, 17 seasons.
Yeah.
And he won 200 games in the big leagues.
But the funny thing is, and you mentioned this with Messina talking early in his career, and who knows how serious he really was.
Oh, I saw his knuckler. He would throw it. It was nasty.
But the thing is, why don't we see more knucklers then? You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where, and I've talked to position players in the Orioles clubhouse, and they're mainly all kind of speaking tongue in cheek, where they all talk about that. And think about it.
They all talk snot, but then they can't hit it.
Well, but think about even, growing up as a kid, how many friends of yours did you have where, guys would mess around trying to throw a knuckleball when you're playing catch? I mean, it's just one of those fun things because it is so quirky, but there's so few guys who have been able to do it. There just aren't many knuckleball pitchers. I mean, the Orioles had Eddie Gamboa a couple years back in the minor leagues where they tried to convert him to doing it. And
can Tim Tebow throw a knuckleball? If Tim Tebow could throw a knuckleball, we'll put him in the big leagues.
Well, he can hit home runs in single A apparently, so he's got that going for him, which is nice. But
by the way, Tim Wakefield only made $56 million and lasted his time in the big leagues is considered 18 and a half seasons. So wow, right?
Yeah. Well, he ended up winning 200 games and
200 games, absolutely.
So it worked for him, but it's really difficult to do. I think lots of people can throw a knuckleball, just messing around. Very, very few individuals have been able to succeed as a knuckleball pitcher, and it's because that margin for error is so incredibly small. And we saw that with Stephen Wright on Wednesday night. I mean, the Orioles absolutely demolished him. I mean, that was, they played at 6 runs in the first inning it was only 27 pitches. So that tells you, it wasn't as though he was throwing a lot of balls and getting into deep counts. He was just getting clobbered. I mean, it was, as you said, it was batting practice. So, that's the trepidation that you have when you're a manager sending a knuckleballer out to the hill, I think, because you know that if it just isn't working for him that night, then it's going to be an absolute demolition, and it's going to mean a really long night for your bullpen. Again, any other pitcher who has 3 or 4 pitches in their repertoire, if one of them just is completely not working, they generally can still compete a little bit. But this is a case where knuckleballer doesn't have his primary pitch. No chance whatsoever, and that's what the Orioles were able to exploit, and it was good they did, based on the way they'd swung the bats the previous couple games.
Trey Mancini, a couple of hits. Castillo's hitting the ball, and Chris Davis began the year, I don't want to say quietly, because it's not quiet, but 3 more hits. Chris Davis has started the year hot, and the team, quite frankly, doesn't have enough guys that have started the year hot, right?
It's true, but then it's funny. If you look at the numbers, just after one big game, it does really remind you of how early in the season it is. You look at it now, Seth Smith, his slash line, average OBP, slugging percentage, looks fine. Adam Jones looks fine. Chris Davis looks fine. Trumbo scuffling, I think that's fair, other than the big home run on opening day. But he had a couple hits on Wednesday night. Castillo swinging the bat well.
Yeah, Scope was struggling until
pretty remarkable what he's been able to do in his brief time in the major leagues. But you go down the list, Scope and Hardy. Of course they had 2 hits each on Wednesday night. Scope hit the home run, but all it takes is one big offensive performance early in the season like this, and the overall numbers start looking better. So it's just a reminder of we're picking apart, and we're going to do this because that's all we can do. We can't not talk about the game.
They play them one at a time. We talk about them one at a time.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just a reminder that, hey, they're a week into this thing in terms of games. They're 7 games in. That's a very small percentage of the season, and was good to see guys get off the schneid a little bit and score some runs, and good to have that kind of a performance going into Toronto, where there absolutely is a danger of poking a wounded bear. The way the Blue Jays are playing.
The red light's blinking there, right? Like the Orioles go in there and sweep them, and they'll fire a manager while I'm in Toronto Monday, right? I mean, literally, like they're 1-7. This is not a good spot for them. They are a wounded creature, I would say, right?
They're just not hitting at all. We've talked about the Orioles not swinging the bats very well, and they haven't. But Toronto has 23 runs in 8 games. And that's just incredible to think that. And that's not all about Edwin Encarnacion. We've all talked about, and we talked about going into the season, whether that offense is going to scuffle. They have some good bats in that lineup, but when you score 23 runs in 8 games, that's you're barely going to beat anyone, and that's exactly what's happened to them. So, they're 1-7. I don't expect the Orioles to go in there and sweep, especially when you don't know who's going to be starting for the Orioles on Saturday. But this is a good opportunity for the Orioles to go in there and try to win a series, try to play better at Rogers Center than they have historically. Even over these last 5 seasons or so where the Orioles have played so much better baseball overall than they had prior to that, Rogers Center has still been a place where they've struggled. So, this is a chance to kick a team while they're down. Don't let the Blue Jays get back up off the mat, at least until next week. But this will be an opportunity. But at the same time, you can keep looking at that and say they're 1-7. I think we all agree that Toronto team's too talented to be playing that kind of baseball for long. So you hope that they don't get well against the Orioles this weekend.
He is Luke Jones. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Baltimore Luke, and of course at Luke at WNST.net. I am headed off to Toronto next week. We'll be there all week doing our thing, and the Orioles will be there doing their thing this weekend. And of course the Caps are playing lots of hockey and basketball. You making any time for basketball or hockey or all? You've written that off at this point. You're all orange all the time right now, right?
It's tough to, especially when you're covering the team out there, at the ballpark and everything and watching all the games at home. It's tough to get invested in anything else. Honestly, I'll watch NBA playoffs and probably first round not worry about it quite as much. But, the Wizards, certainly intriguing. The East is pretty intriguing anyway, with Cleveland struggling the way they did after the All-Star break. So, we'll see how that plays out. But, hockey, if the Caps get to the Eastern Conference Finals, they get to the Stanley Cup, certainly I'll be peeking in on that a little more frequently.
You don't have time for all this excitement, you know?
It's just, you can't watch it all, right?
Hey, man, last night there were 3 hockey games and a baseball game going on, and I really did think, Knuckleballer did me a favor. Wow, the Orioles are up 8-0.
Right.
I'll be able to watch a little of Columbus, a little bit of Montreal, and, I wound up flipping around, and it was a great first night of hockey. It always is. I mean, the energy level, the rinks, the way the guys play, the games are always one-goal games in the third period. I was up at 5 minutes to 1, and I was convinced that Minnesota-St. Louis was going to go to overtime, and it did.
There you go.
It was 22 seconds left to go in the game when they scored the tying goal, and the place went crazy, and they wind up losing in overtime. But pound for pound, it's an exciting time of the year, I think, all the way around. The basketball begins. Of course, the Wizards play on Sunday to start the action at 1 o'clock, and then they get after it again next Wednesday night. We'll be in Toronto all week. The Orioles will be in Toronto all weekend. Luke will be monitoring all things bad bats in Toronto and hopefully better pitching for the Orioles. He is Luke at WNST.net in Baltimore. Luke, I am out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We are available 24 hours a day, even for Adam Jones to tweet at us. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to do that. Coons Florida Security Boulevard sponsors our WNST Tech Service. It's the best thing we do. If you want some breaking news, you want it the minute it happens, you want someone that's been doing it for a decade now and doing it well, it's all brought to you by Coons Florida Security Boulevard. You can sign up at WNST.net. You'll always know first. Dennis is here this Thursday, next Thursday, every Thursday from 3 until 5 with the SSV on WNST. We are making plans for Green Bay, for Nashville, for Oakland, for Minneapolis. We've already got our plans for London. Still selling trips. Sold a couple more earlier this week. If you want to get on the London trip, it's $100 off, but you have to email me first. Nasty at WNST.net or the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.